We are back on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk, 1180. Our guest by phone is Dr. Walter E. Williams, syndicated columnist and sometimes substitute guest host for Rush Limbaugh. Dr. Williams, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about something that we've seen, and that was an article that said that you thought Obama had no chance of losing, and that's a false article. It was not yours?
That is absolutely right, and there's an apology posted on my website, walterewilliams.com, from the people who published it. That is, they were just taken in by somebody who wrote the article and had the moxie to write it in approximately the style that I write articles in, and publish it. And it's been going all over the internet, and I've been responding to people saying, well, Williams, how can you say this, blah, 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 blah. So I've been sending them copies of the apology. But I don't have the slightest idea who wrote it. And if you were to press me for a guess, I would say it's somebody sponsored by George Soros.
Yeah, no question about that. It's interesting. Anybody can write and tell a lie, but it's almost impossible to overcome the lie.
Oh, very, and I would like to know who wrote it, and if it's some kind of organization, I would surely bring some kind of suit against them.
Well, George Soros.
And matter of fact, if somebody out there listening could find out who wrote that, who originally wrote it, I would consider giving them some of the money from the lawsuit.
We'll start looking.
Yeah, there's always a finder's fee involved.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Speaking of finder's fees, you did a couple great articles. I thought the latter part of, actually the first part of this month on greed. I Love Greed was the title of one of them.
Yeah. Well, I think that, and some people have criticized me for using the term greed. They say, well, Williams, why don't you say enlightened self-interest? But here's the question I was asking. I was saying, what human motivation gets the most wonderful things done? And I was saying that it's greed, and I didn't mean like fraud and misrepresentation and dishonesty and getting special favors and all those other kind of despicable acts. I was just talking about people trying to get as much as they can for themselves is the motivation that gets the wonderful things done. And I was giving the example that of Texas cattle ranchers getting up in the dead of night, running down stray cows, feeding them, and blah, 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 making this personal sacrifice so that New Yorkers can have beef on their shelves. And I was asking the question, well, is the reason why Texas cattle ranchers make the sacrifice to make sure New Yorkers have beef on the shelves, is it because they love New Yorkers? Well, they may hate New Yorkers. I'm not that wild about New Yorkers myself, but they make sure that beef and potatoes gets to New York every single day of the week. Why? Because they love themselves. They want more for themselves. And the apple growers in Washington, they send apples all over. They send apples to the East Coast to me. Why? Because they want more for themselves. And so I was pointing out that in the article that greed is the human motivation that gets wonderful things done. Now, some people, maybe rightfully, might object to my using greed. They say, well, why don't you say ambition? Why don't you say enlightened self-interest? Well, that's okay, but I like greed.
And I agree with you. Another comment you made in the article that I loved, you said, capitalism made it possible to become wealthy by serving one's fellow man. That pretty much says it all.
Yeah, right. That is, prior to the rise of capitalism, the way people amassed great wealth was by looting, plundering, and enslaving their fellow man. But with the rise of capitalism, it became possible for people to amass great wealth by serving their fellow man. You ask the question, well, how come Bill Gates is a multi-billionaire? It's the reason why is that he pleased his fellow man. He served his fellow man. He produced something. He produced windows, and his fellow man voluntarily forked over $300 or $400. Many of his fellow men forked over $300 or $400 for windows. That applies to almost everybody who has great wealth. Through the free market system, is that they please their fellow man. Now, I'm not talking about crony capitalists. I mean, they please politicians and screw their fellow man.
Right.
And so we should condemn them, but people who get their wealth through that route. But people who get their wealth by serving their fellow man, I think we should say, well, right on.
Our guest by phone is Dr. Walter E. Williams.
So you don't believe that that sharing the wealth and taking from the rich and giving to the poor is a good idea?
I don't think so. And by the way, a lot of people call that Robin Hood, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. But that's a bad argument against Robin Hood. The real Robin Hood of Sherwood Forest, what he was doing, he was robbing the king's tax collectors.
Right.
So that makes him a hero for me.
Right. Big difference.
Yeah. So if you take from the wealthy, you're actually going to, I believe, destroy jobs and destroy new businesses from coming together.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And then in terms of helping our fellow man, I think it's praiseworthy and laudable to help your fellow man by reaching into your own pockets to help your fellow man in need. I think it's despicable to help your fellow man by reaching in somebody else's pockets. Now, it turns out that Americans are the most generous people on the face of the earth. In fact, we do somewhere around a little bit over 80% of all giving in the world. And that has been a characteristic of Americans, for most of our history. Alexis de Tocqueville, he came here to write about prisons, but he really went back to France talking about Americans. He said, gee, those Americans, they just love committees. Somebody's barn burns down, they have a committee. Somebody becomes widowed, they have a committee. And they were talking about the generous spirit of Americans that still exists to a very, very significant degree today.
Democracy in America.
Yeah.
Dr. Williams, we have to have you back, by the way, because it's, I'm looking at my 3 pages of notes, and I know we're not going to barely touch it in the 4 or 5 minutes we have left. But on the subject of greed, I wanted to kind of relate that back to that debate the other night when Newt Gingrich and Juan Williams kind of squared off a little bit. What did you think about that exchange?
I didn't watch it.
You didn't watch it.
Oh, okay. You didn't see. Okay, well, I don't know if you saw any of the highlights of it. Gingrich was talking about, giving kids jobs, as janitors or whatever at early ages, just so they could learn, the value of having a job and of being able to earn some money.
Well, I think that kids ought to work. I don't know whether the government should be involved, but I've been working since I've been 12 years old. And when I was a youngster growing up in the slums of North Philadelphia, and I talk about this in my recent autobiography, Up From the Projects, and I had all kinds of jobs like caddying on golf courses. As a young teenager, I worked, post office. I delivered mail during Christmas holiday. Worked at Sears and Roebuck's packing house. Now, kids today don't have the kind of opportunities for early work experiences that I had back in the 40s because there are all kinds of laws that prevent kids from working. For example, when it snowed, my cousin and I, we would get our shovels and go down to the Reading Railroad and shovel snow off a train platform. Well, the union, they don't want to see kids shoveling snow off the train platform for $30 or $40 when their member can get $100 or $200 for it. And so they're able to use the law to restrict these kind of early work experiences for kids. And kids who grow up in rotten neighborhoods, go to rotten schools, and have rotten homes, if they're going to learn anything that's going to make them a more valuable worker in the future, it has to be on the job. It has to be on the job training.
I appreciate that, but we only have about a minute and a half left, so I want to ask you a question about health care. What is your thought about the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act that Obama passed?
I think it represents a gross violation of the United States Constitution. That is, to force people to buy something, and I think it's going to represent something that we're going to bring to the United States what we have in Canada. If you go to hospitals in Seattle or Buffalo or cities along the Canadian border, you find a lot of Canadian patients, and you find very few American patients in Canadian hospitals, and you have to ask why. Well, it's because of socialized medicine in Canada, where they have huge queuing times for, some hospitals, I believe in Washington, you guys can check this out, they advertise in Canada saying you don't have to wait 20 weeks for an MRI. You can get an MRI in a week in the United States.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Dr. Williams, we're out of time. Thank you so much for the time. And we would love to have you back in a couple months if that would be possible.
Yes, by all means. I enjoy talking to you guys.
You can need a substitute for us.
I'm not coming out there with all that snow you guys are getting.
Oh, that's okay. Not in Bakersfield.
We don't have snow in Bakersfield.
Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Okay.
We'll
bye.
be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180.